Most villains are born from a single bad day, a tragedy, an accident, a moment of weakness. But for Helmut Zemo, evil wasn't a choice, it was an inheritance. For centuries, the Zemo name has been synonymous with power, influence, and a ruthless disregard for innocent life. But Helmut is different. He is a man caught between the shadow of a monstrous father and a desperate, often twisted desire for his own version of redemption. Today, we are diving deep into the history of the 13th Baron Zemo. We're exploring how a brilliant scientist became a scarred monster, how a master manipulator led a team of heroes to the brink of world domination, and how he eventually turned his back on his father's legacy, only to find his own darkness waiting for him to understand Helmut. We have to look at the man who broke him, Baron Heinrich Zemo. During the dark days of World War II, Heinrich was the Nazis' top scientist, a man so brilliant he created Adhesive X, an unbreakable bonding agent, but so wicked he forced his son Helmut to witness his atrocities firsthand. While other children were raised on stories of heroism, Helmut was raised on the doctrine of Zemo's superiority. He stayed loyal to the family reputation, even as Germany crumbled and the Allies closed in. When the war ended, Heinrich fled to a South American stronghold, leaving his son behind to navigate the ruins of their legacy. But Helmut didn't hate his father for abandoning him. He idolized him. He spent years visiting the insane Baron in the jungle, feeding on his father's hatred for one man in particular, Captain America. When Heinrich finally died during a climactic battle with Steve Rogers, the grief didn't just break Helmut, it transformed him. Helmut didn't immediately become the Purple Max Baron we know today. His first attempt at revenge saw him adopting the persona of the Phoenix. He lured Captain America into a trap, desperate to avenge the father he believed was a martyr. But Helmut lacked his father's experience. During the struggle, a catastrophic accident occurred. Helmut fell into a boiling vat of his father's infamous Adhesive X. He survived, but the chemicals did more than just burn his skin. They scarred him for life, fusing his features into a permanent mask of horror. He didn't just lose his face that day, he lost his humanity. Embittered and hideous, he took up his father's mantle, donned the iconic purple hood, and set out to show the world the true face of the Zemo legacy. But unlike his father, Helmut wasn't just an inventor. He was a strategist. He realized that to kill a legend like Captain America, he couldn't just use science, he needed a war. Helmut Zemo was a man of high intellect, but he carried a secret insecurity. While his father, Heinrich, was a pure inventor, a man who could conjure terrifying new weapons from thin air, Helmut realized early on that he lacked that specific spark of creative genius. He wasn't the architect of new technology, he was the master of its modification, like a dark mirror to his father's work. Helmut took existing concepts and perfected them. He took Adhesive X and made it more versatile. He engineered a specialized headpiece, not for vanity, but for a tactical necessity, to shield his mind from the psionic assaults and mind control attacks that often took down lesser villains. He knew that in a world of telepaths and gods, a strategist's greatest weapon is a clear mind. But intellect wasn't enough. Helmut put himself through a grueling near-inhuman combat training regimen. He became a better marksman and a more lethal hand-to-hand fighter than his father ever was. He wasn't just a scientist in a lab, he was a general in the field. In the mid-80s, Zemo executed what many consider to be the most successful strike against the Avengers in history. He didn't just want to kill them, he wanted to dismantle their spirit. He assembled a new incarnation of the Masters of Evil, a massive roster of powerhouses like Goliath, Titania, and the Wrecking Crew. But this wasn't a random brawl. It was a surgical invasion. Under Zemo's cold leadership, the Masters of Evil did the unthinkable. They successfully invaded and occupied Avengers Mansion. They didn't just win a fight, they took the heroes home. While the world watched in horror, Zemo held the Avengers captive within their own walls. He understood that to truly hurt Steve Rogers, you don't strike his body, you strike his heart. He ordered the brutal torture of the Avengers' loyal butler, Jarvis, a man who represented the soul of the team. He sat in the ruins of the mansion and systematically destroyed Steve Rogers' most precious mementos, items from the 1940s that could never be replaced. It was a display of pure, calculated malice, designed to show that no one was safe from the Zemo legacy. The siege eventually broke. The Avengers rallied, and in the chaotic final battle atop the mansion's roof, Zemo's overconfidence became his undoing. He plummeted from the height of the building, a fall that left him broken and defeated once again. But even as his body healed, his mind remained obsessed with the past. In the years that followed, Helmut's path grew increasingly erratic. He attempted to use the mystical bloodstone to literally resurrect his father, Heinrich, a desperate act of a son still seeking the approval of a ghost.
Yeah.
When that failed, he tried to create a twisted version of a family for himself, abducting children and marrying the villainess Heike, who became the Baroness Zemo. But the universe seems to punish a Zemo who tries to love Heike eventually died in prison, leaving Helmut alone in a cell with nothing but his thoughts and his failures. It was in this silence that the lust for simple revenge began to die, replaced by a much more dangerous ambition, the hunger for absolute power. The landscape of the Marvel Universe changed forever. Following the battle with Onslaught, the Avengers and the Fantastic Four were gone, presumed dead. The world was left unprotected, grieving, and most importantly to Helmut Zemo, vulnerable. Where others saw a tragedy, Helmut saw a vacuum. He realized that the public didn't just need protection, they needed someone to follow. He gathered his masters of evil and proposed the ultimate long con. They wouldn't hide in the shadows anymore. They would step into the light, they would wear bright colors, adopt heroic monikers, and win the hearts of the people. They became the Thunderbolts. Zemo himself took on the mantle of Citizen V, a legacy hero from the war his father had actually murdered. It was a sick, poetic irony that only a Zemo could appreciate. The plan was simple: gain the public's trust, gain access to the world's most sensitive security data, and then strike. But as the Thunderbolts saved cities and heard the cheers of the masses, something unexpected happened. His teammates, criminals like Songbird and Atlas, began to actually like being heroes. They found a purpose they never had in villainy. Zemo, however, remained cold. To him, this was still a game of chess, but his personal life was becoming as complicated as his political one. He entered into a nuanced, dangerous relationship with Carla Sofin, known as Moonstone. She was his intellectual equal, manipulative, brilliant, and just as cynical. In Moonstone, Zemo found something he had never had before: a partner who saw the world for the ugly place it truly was, but their romance was built on a foundation of betrayal. When the real heroes eventually returned from the pocket dimension, Zemo's hand was forced. He attempted to activate a mind control frequency to bring the world to its knees, but his own team turned on him. The masquerade was over. Moonstone nearly killed him in the fallout, and once again the Baron was a man without a country. Zemo's life has always been a cycle of rising and falling, but this time, the fall was literal. He was targeted by the scourge of the underworld and assassinated, but as Zemo is never truly gone, his consciousness was transferred into the body of the modern-day Citizen V, forcing him to live inside the skin of the legacy he had mocked. This period saw a shift in Helmut. He traveled to Counter-Earth, a parallel world where he was hailed as a legitimate savior. He began to believe his own propaganda. He started to think that perhaps the Zemo legacy didn't have to be one of evil, but of order. He saw himself as the only man capable of making the hard choices that the soft heroes like Captain America refused to make. He even delved into the history of his own bloodline, his spirit jumping through time to visit his ancestors. He stood face to face with the ghosts of the Zemo line, and in a moment of pure clarity, he did the unthinkable. He denounced his father. He told the ghost of Heinrich that the old ways were dead. Helmut was no longer a follower, he was the master of his own fate. After returning from his odyssey through time, Helmut Zemo found a world that had moved on. Steve Rogers was gone, presumed dead, and his former sidekick, Bucky Barnes, had taken up the shield. This infuriated Zemo. To him, Bucky was a pretender, a common assassin whose hands were stained with just as much blood as any Zemo. He was deeply jealous of the redemption the world had granted the Winter Soldier, a redemption Helmut felt he had earned but never received. Zemo didn't attack Bucky with a bomb, he attacked him with the truth. He exposed Bucky's past atrocities as a brainwashed Hydra agent to the world, trying to prove that the hero in the mask was a lie. He even kidnapped Bucky not to kill him, but to look him in the eye and force him to admit his sins. But in a rare moment of restraint, or perhaps simple exhaustion, Helmut let him go. He realized that a new age was coming, one that required a different kind of war. The Baron's next major defeat came at the hands of SHIE, but it was a defeat that would eventually lead to his greatest victory. He was sent to Pleasant Hill, a secret prison where the reality-warping powers of a sentient cosmic cube named Kobik were used to rewrite the identities of villains into peaceful, law-abiding citizens. Helmut Zemo was made to forget he was a Baron. He was turned into just another face in a small, idyllic town, but the Zemo intellect is a resilient thing. He slowly regained his identity and, working with his old ally, the Fixer, orchestrated a massive prison break. As the town burned, Zemo didn't just escape, he took Kobik with him. It was here that the pieces of the ultimate game were set. The Cosmic Cube had become fond of Zemo, and more importantly, it had become fond of Steve Rogers. But Kobik's understanding of good was skewed by Hydra's influence. When Kobik rewrote Steve Rogers' history to make him a lifelong Hydra sleeper agent, The world's greatest hero became its greatest threat, and right by his side was Helmut Zemo. In this new reality, Zemo and Steve weren't enemies, they were childhood friends. Two men who shared a vision of a world brought to heel by strength and order. As the head of Hydra's army of evil, Zemo did what he does best. He organized. He utilized the villain Blackout to trap Manhattan inside a dome of dark force energy, cutting the city off from the world. He stood at the right hand of Hydra Cap as they conquered Washington, D.C. For a brief moment, the Zemo dream was realized. He had the power, the influence, and the respect of the man his father had hated most. But the dream was built on a lie. When the real Steve Rogers returned and the Hydra Empire crumbled, Zemo was captured by the Black Panther and Winter Soldier. He was a man who had tasted the ultimate victory, only to realize it was a hallucination crafted by a childlike god. He was back in a cell, but his spirit was far from broken. He had proven that even the purest hero could be turned, and that to Helmut was a victory in itself. After the fall of the Hydra Empire, Helmut Zemo didn't retreat into the shadows. He bought them. He moved his operations to Bagalia, a sovereign island nation populated entirely by supervillains and outlaws. Here, Zemo didn't just act as a criminal, he acted as a statesman. He sought to turn Bagalia into a legitimate international power, proving once and for all that his vision of order could thrive. Where traditional heroism had failed to maintain this status quo, he even manipulated the legendary Mandarin, using him as a political figurehead while Zemo pulled the strings from the dark. He wasn't just fighting heroes anymore, he was managing an entire ecosystem of evil. But even in a nation of monsters, there is one man you cannot control. A man whose singular focus on punishment would soon turn Zemo's legitimate nation into a slaughterhouse. Frank Castle, the Punisher, was eventually extradited to Bagalia, a move Zemo orchestrated to finally put an end to the vigilante. Zemo tortured Frank, mocked his family's death, and even used the chameleon to frame the Punisher for atrocities he didn't commit, hoping to destroy his reputation before his life. But Zemo made a classic mistake. He put the Punisher in a target-rich environment. What followed was a brutal, blood-soaked jailbreak that tore through Zemo's carefully constructed government. Frank Castle didn't care about trade deals or international recognition. He cared about the bodies of the Nazi scum who ran the island. As Bagalia burned, Zemo was forced to flee back to America. His dream of a villainous utopia was reduced to ash, not by an Avenger, but by a lone man with a gun and a grudge. Today, Helmut Zemo remains one of the most dangerous men on the planet. He has clashed with Sam Wilson's Captain America and fought the Winter Soldier across continents, always one step ahead, always rebuilding Hydra in his own image. He is no longer the son seeking a father's approval. He is a man who has looked at the sun and decided he would rather rule the shadows it creates. Helmut Zemo is the 13th Baron of a cursed line, but he is the first to truly master the art of survival. Whether he is wearing the mask of a hero, the crown of a king, or the hood of a terrorist, he remains driven by a single, unshakable belief that the world is a chaotic, broken place that only a Zemo can fix. And as long as there is a Captain America to oppose him, the cycle of the Zemo legacy will never truly end.